Once upon a time, there was a fellow who was shipwrecked on an island. He was industrious and hardworking, and after 15 years, he was rescued. And during this period of time, he had managed to transform this island into a set of roads and buildings. And when these rescuers came, they were impressed. He said, "Could you give us a tour of the island?" He said, Sure. So walking through the island, he says, "Well, this building on the left here, this is my house. And behind it, you'll see that I've got a storage shed for all my tools. I've got a sprinkler system, 3 bedrooms." The rescuers were astonished. They thought, this guy, what he's got is better than what we've got back home. "And the building over here, this is the store where I do my shopping. And next to it is my bank, and across the street is the gym where I exercise." And these guys, their jaws were just dropping. They couldn't believe what this guy had done. He was not sitting on his duff. And the rescuers noticed that there were 2 buildings, and they asked what they were. And the fellow proudly said, "The one on the left, that's where I go to church. And the one on the right, well, that's where I used to go to church." Now, I borrowed this story from Dr. Ken Boa, who has written some very helpful material on conflict resolution. And this story illustrates how deeply entrenched conflict is in our existence. That here's this man living alone, and yet he still had to leave one church and go to another because of conflict. He's trying to illustrate, Dr. Boa is, in this story, how deeply a part of our being human the possibility of conflict is. So we, just like this castaway, also face conflict. We're not immune to this in the church. You see, God is only in the process of converting us. We talk about, well, we're converted. We're not. We're trying. We're working at it. We're a work in progress. So, because we're a work in progress, we will have our faults. But there's also another aspect here, and that is that I don't know what you're thinking. You don't know what I'm thinking. You don't know what the other person is thinking. We can't read each other's minds. So here we are, imperfect beings, and we don't know what the other person is thinking. And what this allows for us to do is to misinterpret why you did that, why you said that, because I can't see what motivated you, so I can make up my own story sometimes. All right, let's turn to 1 Corinthians 1:10. 1 Corinthians 1, chapter 10. You see, this fact that we have our own faults and that we can't read each other's minds presents a problem to us, because as humans, as Christians, we're predisposed to offend each other because we don't know why you did what you did, why I did what I did. But God's expectation of us is not that we would be offended by each other, but that we would be quite the opposite. So here's one of the several places where God shows us very clearly what his expectation is. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 10. "Now I beseech you, brethren," Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:10, "by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing. That there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment." Paul is repeating here Christ's desire that we live in unity and in peace. This is the opposite of our natural disposition. We're working against our natural disposition here, which tends towards offenses, towards divisions, towards cliques, towards conflict. So how do we as Christians, how do we strive for this ideal while at the same time being prone to offending each other? What tools can we employ to restore peace and unity among us when conflict and misunderstandings are working to divide us. What I'd like to do today is I'd like to show how we could restore and maintain unity by going to our brother. Okay, so first off, let's get some background here. As my castaway illustration humorously shows, even this one lone fellow living on an island had conflict. All right? We will always have friction between us. That's because while God can read our hearts, we haven't been created to do that. And we all have grown up in different households, different regions of the country, different ways. So we end up judging ourselves. I judge myself by my intention. I know why I said what I said. I know why I did what I did. I judge you by your actions, by your words. I can't see your heart. So this is what we all do, is we judge ourselves one way and we judge everyone else another way because, lo and behold, we can't read each other's hearts. So we judge each other by our actions. And this fact makes us prone to disagreements and to offenses. God knew that this would happen. He knew He created us without ESP, that we can't read each other's minds. And He gave us instruction very early on in Leviticus as to how to resolve these issues. Let's turn to Leviticus 19, please, and verse 17. Very early on, He showed us how we should go about this. Leviticus 19 and verse 17. I'm going to be reading to you from the English Standard Version. You'll notice that the wording is slightly different, but the underlying Hebrew does allow for this translation. So you'll notice this, Leviticus 19:17. You shall not hate your brother. This is early on. We might think, a lot of people would think this is New Testament stuff. This is God's intent all along. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your brother, with your neighbor, lest you incur sin of him. We can see how important this is to God, because this isn't just a suggestion that we resolve these issues. He commands us to resolve issues between ourselves. And I might be getting ahead of myself here, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But this verse in Leviticus addresses the special case where sin is involved. If your brother sins against you, go to your brother. And that's something that happens amongst us because, not just because of sin, but also because I don't understand why you said what you said, why you did what you did. You see what I mean? Do you understand why I'm talking about our not being able to read each other's minds? When I see someone do something, I have to create kind of a narrative in my head as to what's going on in the other person's head. And we all do this. This allows for us to have misunderstood intentions. I'll be addressing that today. I am not going to be addressing correction. I'm not going to be addressing going to our brother and correcting our brother. I'm going to be talking about going to our brother and communicating with our brother. So when there's been some kind of offense and we find ourselves at odds with our brother, we naturally tend to deal with our brother in one of two ways. Either we'll hold in our frustration, we'll stew on it, and that doesn't exactly help the matter. That just makes for tenseness. Or we'll just blow up at the person right there, blow up in his face. And neither of these bears good fruit. Neither bears good fruit. So when offenses occur, the better way to resolve the resulting division is to, as I was just suggesting here, communicate with each other. Those of us who have been around many years remember this being described as correction. But then, if we're talking correction, if I'm going to go to someone or you're going to come to me and it's about correcting the other person, and yet I don't even know what you're thinking. I don't know why you said what you said. It could have been completely innocent. So, we need to make sure that we understand each other's intentions. I make a big deal out of intent rather than actions because our intent is what drives our actions. Right? I'll just cite this here, but in Deuteronomy 5:29, no need to turn there, but God's lament over Israel was that Israel didn't have a heart to obey him. Israel didn't have an intent to obey him. Deuteronomy 5:29, I'll read it to you. Oh, that there were such an heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. God was interested in Israel having the right intent, the right heart, because the right heart produces the right actions. Action follows intent. Now, I'm not trying to give us a bye for when some of us might have wrong actions. I'm just trying to illustrate why it's so important that we view conflict resolution in terms of communication instead of correction. All right. So when we sit down and we talk with our brother in loving communication, we might discover that we had the wrong end of the stick. So generally speaking, until we know what a person's intent is, we can't make any judgment whatsoever about their actions. And much of what we're offended by is not the actions of an individual. You ever notice that? It's not the actions of the individual that offends us. It's what we perceive is going on in the gray matter. It's that offends us. It's what I think you're thinking that offends us. This is where communication comes in. So what I'd like to do is address the idea of reconciling with our brother by covering the following points. Number one, why should we go to our brother? Number one, why should we go to our brother? Number two, you might find this odd. Should we go to our brother? Should we go to our brother when we're offended? Number two. Number three, how not to go to our brother. That's also important. How not to go to our brother. Number four, how we should go to our brother. And lastly, how to receive a brother's attempt to reconcile with us. So let's look at our first point. Point number one is, why should we go to our brother? Why should we go to our brother? As I pointed out earlier, God wants us unified. Just recently, a church fast was called for us to be unified. This is how we make that happen. We fast asking God, help us with that. This is the knees on the ground and shoulder to the grindstone part of that. When there are misunderstandings and offenses, and we don't reconcile with each other, I spoke about this just recently, we can start to feel alienated from one another, separated from one another, not unified. Dr. Boa, the fellow whose story I borrowed for my introduction, says that when we put off confrontation, when we put off going to our brother and trying to settle an issue, he said, it only strains relations. If we just put it off, it strains relations and inevitably compounds the problem. If we think it's bad now, just try applying a bit of negligence and see where that takes us. So putting off going to our brother only strains relations, inevitably compounds the problem. Avoidance allows bitterness to simmer and alienation to solidify. So putting off confrontation strains relations, compounds the problem. Avoidance allows bitterness to simmer and alienation to solidify. So it doesn't build a happy, healthy, cohesive church, does it? Let's turn to Romans 12. Romans 12, please. We'll read verse 18. Here the Apostle Paul is underscoring how important it is for us as a church to strive for unity. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. Romans 12, 18. Paul says, if it be possible, and there are a lot of things that are a lot more possible than we perhaps give credit to, but if it be possible, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men. That is our goal. That's what God puts before us as our goal. As much as lies within us, this isn't something we do in our spare time. Paul here is describing something of paramount importance to us. You see, a church that is hurt, that's offended, and even bitter against itself is going to be more like a ball and chain to our God as he tries to heal a very hurting world when he resurrects people. It'll be more like a ball and chain to him than an asset if we are hurt and alienated and smarting from an offense. So we do our best to live at peace with each other. And since offenses and divisions are so prevalent, that this story of this castaway, this lone person on an island, while it may sound a bit absurd, isn't altogether absurd. We know that offenses will come. Matthew 18. Matthew 18, please. We'll read 2 verses here. Matthew 18, 6 and 7. We'll all recognize Matthew 18 probably because Matthew 18:15 says, go to your brother. But the whole chapter deals with problem resolution. So Matthew 18, verse 6, this passage is illustrating how seriously God views offenses. So reading verses 6 and 7, whosoever, Matthew 18:6, but whoso shall offend one of these little ones, which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. So again, if we put off trying to resolve this, we might be preparing God to fit us for a millstone. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. Offenses will happen. And we all offend. We all offend. I had quite the fright this week. A dear friend of mine, I thought, oh no, have I offended him? Because he wasn't in touch with me anymore. And so I had to go to him quite humbly and say, I'm sorry, have I hurt you somehow? We all offend. And not all offenses are created equal. Let's be clear. So this isn't a one-size-fits-all. Sometimes we might say something awkward or inappropriate that leaves our brother feeling ill at ease, and that happens. In such cases, we're better off applying, I'll just read to you Proverbs 17:9. You can put it in your notes. Proverbs 17, verse 9. Solomon says, he that covers a transgression seeks love. Covering a transgression. If we don't try to resolve things, when more serious offenses happen, we can shatter our cohesiveness. And we have to remember that God holds us personally liable for our brother's welfare if we cause our brother to stumble. And sometimes it's bad enough that God says that it would be appropriate to hang a millstone around someone's neck and drown him in the sea. This is how much he cares about offenses. So anyway, not every offense warrants our going to our brother. Sometimes we just cover this in, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. But reconciling with our brother is something that God takes very seriously. So in this point number 1, we've covered why we go to our brother. We go to our brother because God desires peace. We're supposed to be the bride, singular bride of Jesus Christ. So we go to our brother because God desires this peace in us. He desires that his son's bride, the church, would be at peace, cohesive, and healthy. And we go to our brother because, as we'll see shortly, God commands us to. Point number two. So we've covered why we go to our brother. Now, should we go to our brother? That might seem like an odd statement, but should we go to our brother? It's something we need to consider. So I read to you earlier Leviticus 19:17, where it said, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor." So when our brother has done something that bothers us, we follow this command, and clearly going to our brother resolves offenses. And it's a biblical thing that we go to our brother. It is biblical. But let's turn to Proverbs 19 now. Proverbs 19, we'll read verse 11. Now, I stated this as a question. Should we go to our brother? Because it's not a gimme that that's the best thing to do. You see, there is an old adage, if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. My dad marveled at some fellow that installed our carpet in our home back in the 70s. He said this guy did the whole thing with just two tools. He had the one tool where, you know how they use their knee to stretch the carpet and then staple it in? The other was a behunkin screwdriver like this. And he used that for everything. But if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So, obviously, going to our brother to reconcile an issue, it's not the only or necessarily even the wisest means to resolve an offense. Proverbs 19:11, "The discretion of a man defers his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression." So obviously there are some transgressions, there are some faults where we need to consider, we need to weigh this out and recognize that, you know what, I might make it worse if I go to my brother and say, you know, when you said that to me, that really hurt. That can at times, especially if it's something kind of lightweight, that can strain a relationship more than help. Sometimes the honorable thing is to pass over a transgression. I've said many times before that God's way doesn't lie just in the black and in the white. You will do this, you won't do that. It lies in the gray. God wants us to exercise discernment. You know, the laws about clean and unclean meats, we've often called those health laws, as though God put those in place because he wants us healthy. Well, yeah, I suppose so, but the Bible never says that. You know that. It says it's so that we could discern between the common and the clean. God wants us to learn to discern. So here we are, we're talking in this point about discernment. Discerning about whether we should do something or not. Where we're trying to exercise the Spirit that God has given us to ascertain whether this is going to cause fireworks or lead to more unity. So if we're fellowshipping, for example, and our brother makes us the butt of a joke, if it's not his habit, even though it made me feel uncomfortable and a bit icky, if it's not his habit, you know, perhaps a more honorable thing to do is just to let it pass. There are times that we will apply that discernment that God has given us. Remember, that as Christians, most of what we face is not in the black or in the white, it's right here in the gray. We have to learn, exercise discernment. Proverbs 9 now. A few chapters earlier, Proverbs 9, 7 through 8. I suspect that most offenses fall into this category. They're minor, they're transitory, and in some cases, the better tool to employ would be to follow Proverbs 19:11 and just pass over the transgression. But here in Proverbs 9, 7 through 8, there's another case. There's another case where we'd want to avoid going to our brother. It says in Proverbs 9, verse 7, he that reproves a scorner gets to himself shame. So if you come to me and I'm a scorner, well, watch out. There'll be problems. He that rebukes a wicked man gets himself a blot. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. I don't think God is telling us here that we now need to look at everyone around us and say, is he a scorner, and just start classifying people. That's not the point. But there is something about this that says that, look, and this is also a very good lesson in Bible study, because we all know Galatians 6:1 says, go to your brother. Matthew 18:15 says, go to your brother. So we can say, well, the Bible says I should do it, so therefore I just jolly well go off and do it. And then when I run into my first scorner, I realize, that didn't go well. All right, so we have to make sure that we take in all the scriptures on a subject and not just make one our hobby horse. So we have Matthew 18:15, Galatians 6:1 that say go to your brother in humility. But there is also a case to consider where, how is he likely to respond? I also want to be careful in saying this, because this could sound like we could perhaps take this as license not to go to our brother. Because let's face it, when we are offended by someone, I feel hurt, okay? I feel hurt. I don't feel like I have the upper hand with this fellow. And so just because I don't feel like I have the upper hand with this fellow is not an excuse for me to say he's a scorner. Let's be honest with ourselves and honestly assess. Matthew 5, please. Matthew 5, 23 to 24. Now, this is a bit of a twist on this idea, should we go to our brother? But Matthew 5, 23 and 24, in this scenario, we might not naturally consider this. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, Matthew 5, 23, and there remember that you have aught against your brother. You've got something against your brother. Here I'm doing something noble before God. This shows how much God values, what God values. Does he value our looking all righteous and proper by doing something to honor him? Well, we have not maintained a relationship with our brother. He says, if you come before me and you're bringing your gift to me, and there you remember that, hang on, I know my brother has something against me. He says, drop what you're doing, leave there your gift at the altar, go your way, first be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. This is how important unity is to God. This shows where God's head is. My dad, look, he did have a rough life. His mom died, caught scarlet fever from him when he was 10, and she died from it while she was nursing him back to health. He went through World War II, and believe me, I mean, I still remember the fear in his voice when he would tell me about kamikazes coming at you. You can shoot them down all you want, they're still coming at you. All right, so he had a tough life. But he said to me, what kind of God would want people to come before him and say what a wonderful person he is? Why would a humble, loving God want us to go before him and just sing his praises? Well, okay, this shows what kind of God he is. Because his focus is not on our going before him and singing his praise and saying what a wonderful God he is. He wants us to be at one with our brother. And nothing takes the sting out of a broken relationship than to go to our brother, to go to our sister and say, I'm sorry. I was wrong. So should we go to our brother? If it's really a minor issue, can we just let it pass? The more we focus on it, the more we churn on it, seriously, if it's just a minor issue, and again, it comes back to discernment, because it's not for me to judge. This is what God lets each of us manage ourselves. Sometimes it's a minor issue. Maybe we can just let it go with a breath of kindness. Or maybe it's with a brother whom we expect might not take it well. There as well, we have to weigh this out and honestly weigh this out and say, you know what, I don't think that would go over well. So should we go to our brother? Brethren, let's use judgment. Let's use honesty and use judgment, okay? We need to consider, maybe I'm the one. Maybe I hurt you. And maybe I need to come to you and say, I'm sorry. So something that we'll notice is that in every one of these cases, when we're considering whether we should go to our brother to reconcile with her or with him, the intended outcome is always that we increase the degree of peace and unity in the church. When Mr. Elliott tells us to fast for unity, that is not just an idle request. This is what it takes. This is the implementation of what he asked us to fast about. To increase the degree of peace and unity in the body. And if we don't foresee that what we're about to do is going to increase the peace and unity in the family, then perhaps we shouldn't do it. Puts a lot of power in our hands. A lot of power in our hands. So we discussed why we go to our brother. We discussed, should we go to our brother? Let's shift gears a bit here now, and let's talk about what to do when we actually do go to our brother, okay? And I want to reemphasize, this isn't a sermon about correction. If I already know what's in your heart, you already know what's in my heart, then be my guest. Come to me and correct me, okay? But that's the problem. We don't know until we first communicate. We haven't a clue what's going on between the ears of the person in front of us. So, we're talking communication, not correction. We still judge ourselves and others by different criteria. I can feel free to judge myself by my intentions. I can excuse my own actions because I know what my intentions are, but your actions are unforgivable because I can ascribe to you what your intentions are. Does this, you see why I keep bringing this up? This is part and parcel to how we've been created. We can't read each other's minds. We don't know what the other person's thinking. So we judge each other by our actions without a clue as to what's going on in the gray matter. So, I'd like here to cover how we go to our brother. This is point number 3. Point number 3. Let's talk about how not to go to our brother first. Point number 3, how not to go to our brother. And subpoint A, 3A, is we might try to even the playing field here. We have different temperaments, all of us. And when a brother is offended, like I said, we feel vulnerable. If I feel angry, I'd better recognize that what's at the basis of the anger is not rage, it's hurt. I feel hurt. Okay? Let's be honest with ourselves. So we might try to even out the playing field. I knew a bunch of guys I'll just say, in a country in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And they had a deaconess who was in charge, and she was a force to be reckoned with. And these guys felt like they weren't heard. And I said, okay, go to her, talk to her. One of you go. Not all of you, one of you go. So, what happens? They all descend upon her at once. We try to even out the playing field. She had power, they had numbers. That's trying to even out the playing field. We try to do this because we feel vulnerable. What I'm talking about here takes courage. It takes courage to go to our brother because we're already feeling hurt, aren't we? This is probably subconscious when we try to even out the playing field. That's not the only way, bringing numbers. There are other ways. So we try to even out the playing field with our brother because we feel vulnerable. He's got enough power that he can inflict hurt on me, or she has, or however that works out. We try to do this because we feel powerless. So we try to, 3A's, we try to even out the playing field. We don't do that. 3B, the second thing we can try to do is we can try to make her feel our pain. Because the idea is, that hurt me so much, if she understood how that hurt me, then she would not do that anymore. That's how we reason, but fighting fire with fire only makes for a lot of fire. And a lot of things get scorched in doing that. So we try to let the other person have a taste of his own medicine. And again, I don't think this is conscious that we do this. But we're approaching this from a perspective of vulnerability. Let's turn to Proverbs 24. Proverbs 24, verse 29. We'll read exactly about this. Proverbs 24:29 speaks about our reaction when someone has done us harm. And Solomon says in verse 29, he says, "Say not, I will do so to him as he has done for me, tit for tat. I will render to the man according to his work." You know, not even God does this. I've cited to you Romans 2:4 before. How does God deal with us? Why is it that he says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay"? Because he doesn't generally deal in vengeance. He says it is, how does that go again? The goodness of God leads us to repentance. So we're sinning. How does he deal with us? Goodness. And by goodness, he leads us to change. All right, so if our brother senses that our approach is to make him feel our pain, that we're trying to even the score with him, we're going to lose him. We've got an opportunity here. Let's not waste this opportunity. Let's not think in terms of payback. That doesn't unify. Romans chapter 12, please. We've got a few verses to read here. We'll read 17 through 19. I just cited this, Romans 12, 17 through 19. The Apostle Paul is shedding more light on this exact same topic. He says in Romans 12, verse 17, he says, "Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of men." And in verse 18, he says, "If it be possible, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men." And then in verse 19, he says, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord.'" But let's remember that when our brother has offended us, we don't hate our brother. We might hate what we perceive he's done to us. We can see what he's done. We know, we can recall the words. We don't know why she did it, why he did it. But let's remember that we don't hate our brother. We're trying to regain our brother. Let's go to point number 4. Point number 4. Now that was how not to go to our brother. This is now how we should go to our brother. So this is point 4A. Let's talk about the communication aspect of going to our brother. We're talking about opening up a communication channel with our brother so that we can discover what the other person was thinking, and that can bring about a lot of surprises, because we'll find out that our ability to assess what was going on in the other person's mind might not have been all that accurate. So we need to be thinking in terms of communication, not correction. Communication, because we're trying to overcome this natural gap that we were created with, where we can hear what the other person says, but we cannot see what he's thinking. That is what communication is meant to overcome. And I've said this many times before. How do we judge? We judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. So this opens the door for us to be able to not judge by actions, but to actually be able to see spelled out to us the person's intentions. James 1:19. James 1, verse 19. When we go to our brother, we need to certainly express to him how his actions have affected us. That's part and parcel. That's to be expected. We have to open our mouth. We have to express something. But brethren, we also have to listen. James 1:19 and 20. Wherefore, my brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man works not the righteousness of God. I was in a very tense situation a few years back with someone with whom I had a pretty major disagreement. And we got together, we sat down at a table under the oak tree, and I started to explain, look, this is where I'm coming from. I had several points I was going to go through. And he started to interrupt me, and then he stopped himself. And I always respected that. He stopped himself and he said, go ahead. He wanted to hear me out. We need to make sure that we are listening, not just talking. Next, this is 4B. We need to use I messages. iMessages. What are iMessages? Some of you know. How many of you know what iMessages are? Okay, I see 2 people here. All right. iMessages. This is from the website beyondintractability.org. I'll quote this. One of the easiest ways to defuse an interpersonal conflict is to avoid accusatory or escalatory language that just inspires a vehement reaction. One way to do this is by using statements about yourself and your feelings called I messages, because they start with I feel, I felt, I think. Instead of you messages that start with an accusation. You did this bad thing. You are another bad thing. In other words, if you say, I felt let down, rather than you broke your promise, you'll convey the same information, but you'll do it in a way that's less likely to provoke a defensive or hostile reaction from your opponent. He calls them an opponent. I'm still quoting here. You messages blame. You did this, you said that, you did the other. And they encourage the recipient to deny. Think of it. If you were on the other side of me And I said, well, you said this and you did that. The first thing you're going to do is say, see, it wasn't your intent. You might well have said that, but the first thing we want to do because someone is coming at us in this way is we want to deny because that might have been what I said, but that wasn't my intent. So I say, nuh-uh, hold on. So it immediately creates kickback. So if you say, you broke your promise, the answer is likely to be, no, I didn't, which sets you up for a lengthy argument, or, well, you did too, which also continues a conflict. But iMessages simply state a problem without blaming someone for it. This makes it easier for the other side to solve the problem without having to admit that they were wrong. It gives a person a chance to deal with it and come around and say, you know, I was wrong. We don't need to tell that individual he's wrong if we allow that person the space and the love and the patience for him to be able to say that himself. So we don't accuse people. We use iMessages. Look up iMessages. It's spelled just like it sounds. I, as like me, iMessages. Look it up on the internet. There's plenty on there. So it might turn out that if we do this, we'll find out that we got the wrong end of the stick. So, 4C, handling rejection. Subpoint 4C. When we go to our brother, we need to know how to handle rejection. I have gone to people before and I said, well, hey, look, when you said this, when you did this, and I've tried to explain to them as well as I could, and the person says, nothing doing. No, I didn't do that. No way. And just completely shuts me down. And you know what I've noticed is not too much time passes, and then I see a change. Because we all take time to process. If I go to you, I've been stewing over this for a while. You haven't. This is brand new stuff for you. You had no idea there's a problem before. So it's a big shock for you. So we need to expect that it's not going to sound like it went over well first time through. We need to allow our brother space. So even if the initial response is saying, no, I don't see what you're talking about, give him space. It might take a few days, months. It might take a few years. Give him space. Okay, so that's how we how we go to our brother. Let's look at how we receive an effort to resolve conflict. Last point, number 5. How do we receive an attempt to resolve conflict? So, like I was just explaining, I am offended. I have had time to think this over and mull this over. I know what I want to say. You are shocked. All right, so that is just part and parcel to the way it works because the person who is offended has a head start in thinking this through. We need to allow that our brother has not had that head start. But we also need to be preparing ourselves. Let's turn to James 3, verse 2. James 3, verse 2. We need to be preparing ourselves by looking at ourselves. I've referred to Galatians 6:1 a few times. It says that we need to humbly go to our brother. Humility is great for going to our brother. Humility is also great for receiving our brother if he believes that we have hurt him. So, James 3, verse 2, for in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man and able to bridle the whole body, and such a man does not exist. That was Jesus Christ, and he's since gone into the heavens. So let's just face it. We all offend, and we're all offended. This is not us against them. This is you and me all in the same boat. We all offend. I offend. And since we all offend, we should know how difficult it is to go to our brother, how scary it is, because when we feel offended, we feel hurt. When we feel hurt, we feel disadvantaged. We feel vulnerable. We have to know how scary that is. So when someone comes to us, we have to make sure that we now move to my subpoint A, 5A. We need to consider ourselves in humility. We need to consider ourselves in humility. We all offend. Let's turn to Galatians 6:1. I've mentioned this so many times, we may as well read it. Galatians 6:1. If we remember nothing else from this sermon, we need to remember this one single verse that Paul tells us. This tells us what our attitude must be. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1. Paul tells us in Galatians 6, verse 1, he says, "Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault," notice it's overtaken. Notice how mercifully he says that. Not if he has perpetrated a fault, but if he's been overtaken by a fault. "You which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted." In other words, I need to be aware of myself going to my brother. And now let's change the tables, turn the tables here. Now, that's getting ahead of myself too. I won't do that quite yet. I'll cover in just a second. So if I offend you, I should already have considered myself. That should be my step one if I go to you. But we need to be preparing ourselves ahead of time in the same manner. We don't know when we might have offended someone. We all need to be humble. When I thought I had offended my friend, I went to him humbly and I said, "Look, I'm sorry. I have had no intent to ever hurt you. I'm sorry if I have offended you." We have to have that response. 5B, we need to acknowledge our brother's feelings. We have to realize that it takes a lot of courage for someone to go to his brother and say, "Could we talk?" Because we might think that he's on the offensive, but from his perspective, he's the one that's been hurt. So let's just respect how much this is difficult for someone to gather the nerve. And let's add the love, because when someone comes to us to say, "Could we talk?" it's not because he doesn't like us. It's because he loves us and wants that bond to be there again. So even if we don't feel responsible for how our brother feels, we should at least try to understand how he's feeling. And maybe one of the first things we could do is say, "Look, I'm sorry, it's never been my intent." We might not have to own up to having had any ill intent, but we can always say, "Look, it's never been my intent to hurt you." Coming back to intention. Sincerely expressed regret goes a long way. And then point C, 5C, we need to do perception checks. We need to echo back what our brother is saying. When our brother sits down with us and starts telling us how deeply he was hurt by what we said, what we did, if I just tell him, "Right, okay, so yeah, I remember I said that, and yes, so that he knows that we're following. We echo back just enough of what he's saying so that he knows that it's sinking in. It's not going in one ear and out the other. So we echo back. We give him a perception check so he knows that he's got me in the palm of his hand. I'm following him, and I care about what he's saying. Let's also know that our sister might be emotional, angry even. If our sister is angry, if our brother is angry, we need to understand that it's probably fear. It's probably hurt that's at the basis of that, not hatred. So, and that's hard to be on the receiving end of. I was at church one day, and one of the ladies came up to me, and she just let loose on me, and I just let her talk. And I listened. I had nothing to do with the problem, but just listening to her helped her. Okay, we can do that. We are big boys and girls. We can do that. We could do that. And none of this is saying that we say we were wrong where we weren't. But the point is, if we communicate, if we handle this rightly, maturely, we will each have a better idea because we've communicated. We'll have an idea where the other person was coming from, and maybe I'll modify how I talk to you from here on out because I know that you had a rough life and this, or that maybe I had a rough life and I speak this way. Who knows? But we'll each come out of it knowing that we need to be more gentle and careful. So, in conclusion, Ken Boa's story about this lone castaway, this isolated man on this island who left one church for another because of conflict. It's funny. It's funny, but it says what we swim in, how we're made. We can't read each other's hearts. We don't know what the other person's thinking. And so we are bred for conflict to be there. So we discussed first why we should go to our brother. God wants us unified and living in peace as his son's bride-to-be. We looked at, should we go to our brother? There are times where we shouldn't. We need to weigh it. We need to use discernment. We need to be honest and not say, oh no, he would be a scorner because I'm scared. Let's be honest, okay? Because we're ascribing something to our brother. We don't want to do that. Thirdly, we looked at how not to go to our brother. We shouldn't go to level a playing field. We shouldn't try to make him hurt as he made us hurt. We should not go to our brother that way. Fourth, we looked at how we should go to our brother. Point A was it's communication. Communication, communication, communication. B, we use I messages because it removes any sense of accusation, escalation from our verbiage. C, we accept that this might not work out. We allow for rejection, and we handle it gracefully. And lastly, point 5, we consider ourselves. Point A. B, we acknowledge our brother's feelings. Our brother feels hurt. Whether I intended to hurt or not, my brother feels hurt. My sister feels hurt. We acknowledge our brother's or sister's feelings. And lastly, we echo back what she's saying, what he's saying, so that she's sure that we know what took place in their point of view. There's this old saying, if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Let's use the right tool. Sometimes going to our brother is not the right tool. And when we go to our brother, we don't go with a hammer. I've given you some tools here that we can use to bring peace and unity. I'm recommending that we discern honestly whether we should, how we should go to our sister, go to our brother. We need to try to preserve harmony in the church. We need to do our best. In closing, I'd like to read John 17, verses 20 and 21. John 17, verses 20 and 21. Our older brother, Jesus Christ, understands this. In his final prayer before he died, he focused on his desire for us to be unified. John 17, verse 20. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also, which shall believe on me through their word. He's talking about you and me. Verse 21, that they all may be one, even as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they may be one, that the world may believe that you have sent me.